You are listening to the SDSU Football Podcast, presented by the East Village Times, with your hosts Andre Hagverdian and Paul Garrison. Welcome, listeners, to the SDSU Football Podcast. I am Andre Hagverdian and joined, as always, by Paul Garrison. How you doing, Paul?
Fantastic, brother. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. We made it to the Big 5-0. This is episode 50.
Unbelievable.
It's pretty cool how we've ended up here, after we've mentioned it on the podcast a few times that, when we started this, we had no idea where it was headed, maybe do one or two a month. And we definitely overextended that estimate for sure.
No, but it's been fun. It's been fun doing these, man. And I think it worked out really well because this episode, man, is super exciting because I think as you said, one of our guests, people really enjoy the guest more than they enjoy hearing us ramble. So for 50th, man, I thought we got the perfect group of people to come in and talk.
Yeah, for the 50th episode, we didn't get just one special guest; we got two.
There you go.
And we'll get to those a little bit later. First, let's do a quick recap of the San Jose State game. I think it was the best game of the season offensively for sure. A lot of big plays offensively, big plays defensively. Obviously didn't get off to a great start, but how it ended up was obviously something that a lot of Aztec Nation were very happy about. How did you take in that game?
I thought Jordan Byrd was the hero of that game. I thought that there was an opportunity for that game to get away from the Aztecs, for them to, they don't fold. I mean, that's just not who they are. So I would never expect them to give up on a thing, but the momentum was just so far in the other direction that it had the feeling of like, and judging by how the season had went, if there was a team that was going to win convincingly, it was going to be San Jose State. It was not going to be the Aztecs. And so for Jordan Byrd to hit that home run touchdown in the kickoff return, and I mean the way he did it, man. I mean it was not one of those, like against Utah last year where it was just blocked so perfectly that him and Cepho could just run through and nobody would touch on them, So I just thought that was a special moment by a special player. It was just needed. It was just needed for him to be able to step up like that.
It was funny when they asked him what he was thinking on that play. He was like, I was just thinking about what Coach Deke tells us is don't let the kicker tackle you. That's what's going through his mind is don't let the kicker tackle me. And so it's pretty cool. He became the first player in FBS since 2018 in one season to get a kickoff return touchdown, a punt return touchdown, a receiving touchdown, and a rushing touchdown. And he almost had a passing touchdown.
I'm kind of mad at Jay Rudolph now.
Yeah, the defender Jay Rudolph could have made a better play for the ball, but the defender was also there. And
he would have had to have made like a Sports Center top 10 play where, you've seen it a couple times where they go around the defender and they're able to like pin it against their back. No, he didn't really have a chance. I just meant that, if he could have come up with that to be able to throw. But hey, there's two more games and, maybe it can happen.
Yeah, well, I think the best part about the offensive production was how balanced and spread out it was. You had three receivers that had at least 4 catches. Each had a touchdown, and Shavers and Matthews and Mekhi Shaw, who had a big game himself. So Jalen Armstead had his first career rushing touchdown. He had a punt return touchdown when the Arizona game where the ball hit the back of the up man and Jalen fell on it. So that was his first touchdown, but this was his first rushing touchdown. The offense is definitely on an upward swing over the last 5 games, and this was the best performance, most complete performance, if you look at it that way. The first half at Fresno might have been just as good, but obviously that didn't sustain for a whole game. And the way the game ended, there's not a lot of positivity to look back on. But it's going to be really cool to see how the team finishes out the season based on how they're doing offensively and defensively, because the defense is playing really good too.
I agree, and I think that this was one of those games where, who the Aztecs were going to be, I think was going to be determined. And if they were going to be a middling team that was going to be around 500, just barely scrape into a bowl, and now they have the potential to really, have a season that you look back on, you go, man, if they could adjust or something like that. But they're right there doing that, and I think not only does this help for these last two games and then the bowl, but with the idea that, that Jalen Mayden is coming back and what it can mean for next year, I think that, you could look back at the San Jose State game as one of those games where you really saw it come together for the first time. As you said, spread the ball out. I thought Mekhi Shaw was just fantastic. And he's had moments, but just to be consistent throughout a game as being a dangerous target, I thought that was pretty special for a hometown guy, a walk-on. Just thought he played really well.
Yeah, we've talked a lot mostly about the offense, but the defense obviously came up big after the first two drives. 5 sacks, Brady Hoke had, maybe some reverse psychology talking about how the defensive line for San Jose State he thought was the best in the country, and how, he knew that would tick off, players in his locker room, and it worked because those guys played really well. Jonah Tavai has just been a monster this year. He had 3 sacks. I think he's near the top in the FBS in terms of pressures, sacks, have an amazing year. Like, I think, we've been talking a lot about Michael Shawcroft for potential defensive player of the year in the Mountain West, but you'd have to put Jonah Tavai up there along with some of the other guys from the other teams. So he's just been playing lights out, and the secondary has really improved its play as well. Both the safeties and the cornerbacks are making plays and not giving up as many big plays. So a lot of positivity on the defense as well.
Completely agree. And, you following up with your point about Tavai, when you start getting in that hunt for conference player of the year, there are just those games, and to have 3 sacks, he had I can't remember the number, but it was 5 or 6 pressures. I mean, he was just, he might as well have been a fullback for San Jose State, because he was just in the backfield the entire night. They knew to block him, obviously, but they weren't rushing more than 4 guys very often. They were, dropping a lot of people back, and it didn't matter. And it didn't matter the angle that he came from. It didn't matter what was going on. He was going to pressure the quarterback. And it was, you talk about conference player of the year, and I would say, like, before San Jose State, you're like, oh, well, there's other guys, but man, he had a special game. I mean, a really special game. And then, Des Malone, I think, has really helped to solidify the defense in just being able to hold down one side of the field and allow just kind of the other parts of the field to have a little bit more help from other players. I think one of the big stories of the year is Cedarius Barfield. I mean, to do what he did against Arizona, and then to stay with it and get opportunities, to play in a backup role, and now obviously with the injury to Baskerville, it's a redemption story. And I think it's what makes college sports so much better. Years ago, Rocky Long talked about, this isn't the NFL. If somebody has a bad game, you don't get to cut him and go get somebody else. I mean, these are your players. And to see a young man, start really high, because there were high expectations for him in that position, and then to not meet them, but then to work his way back. And I thought he had a fantastic game. I like the balance that it gives the defense by having 2 guys who can cover at that warrior safety position. And so it's an exciting defense. And I think that these last couple of games, I think there's a lot to tune in for and to pay attention to.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot on social media this week talking about Mekhi Shaw potentially getting a scholarship because he's a walk-on, but Devon Celestine is also a walk-on, and he's been a starter since week 2. plays every snap. I think the last two games he's played every snap on defense, maybe even more than the last two games. Oh, I definitely. Once Baskerville went down and Barfield came in, I think Celestine has been playing every snap. So
Yeah.
probably, and I believe they have one scholarship open
Okay.
at the moment. So there's probably this at least battle for this season if Coach Hoke, which he said possibly yesterday when I asked him about potential scholarships for walk-ons, there might only be one available and two guys fighting for it for now. Obviously, next year is a whole different issue with people leaving and people coming in. So there might be opportunity for both to get one.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And it's a good segue, I think, to the conversation that we had with Craig Smith, where we were asking him about walk-ons and how that works and guessing and having no knowledge whatsoever. But, maybe one of them has an avenue to be able to have more financial help with the tuition than the other one. And that might make sense. But if all things being equal, I think you got to give it to the older guy, right?
Yeah.
That was right. I mean, I think that would be a good way to do it if there was only one. But I think looking into next year and what these guys have meant, it would be a surprise or definitely a topic if these guys don't have a scholarship next year.
Yeah, as you mentioned, our first guest today is Craig Smith. He's the new director of player personnel at San Diego State. He took over from Matt Rosano, who was the previous director of player personnel. Craig has been with the program for a couple years under operations, so he's not new to San Diego State, but he is new into the recruiting world. And it was really cool to kind of pick his brain on the recruiting and how the transfer portal and NIL and all that stuff has factored into how that works. And with early signing day coming up in a month, it's a really busy time, a lot of stuff going on. So we were appreciative of him to take 30 minutes out of his day to come talk to us. So let's get to that interview. We want to welcome Craig Smith to the podcast. How are you doing today, man?
Doing pretty good. How are you guys?
Well, for sure.
Good.
The early signing period for class of 23 is just a few weeks away. You have some verbal commits. Obviously, this program isn't allowed to talk about anyone specific until they sign. But what does the program hope to get done before that signing period day?
Yeah, the biggest thing, obviously, is starting with your needs. Obviously, you kind of start there with any class, kind of obviously seeing where things are falling. And that's a little challenging with the new day and age, a little bit with the transfer portal, a little bit, and then also with the COVID years. So that obviously plays a factor. And with our program specifically, we really hold those conversations postseason. So sometimes the discussion of position needs and numbers are kind of always forever changing. And, we can use that example and talk about Jalen Mayden, for example. Obviously started out, had him at the safety position and that type of number. And now he's at quarterback and coming back, already announced that. Those numbers are forever changing because, you're recruiting certain positions and how things kind of transpire there. Again, that's kind of the starting point is always figuring out what you're recruiting and how many you're recruiting at those positions. And then obviously starting in San Diego is our very first starting point.
Yeah, it's you mentioned that about the numbers game, right, with scholarships and things like that. Obviously, the primary focus right now is 23, but you guys are pretty deep into recruiting for 24 as well. So how do you and the rest of the staff kind of juggle future seasons when you're having these discussions with players and you don't know if who you're going to have back and how many scholarships you're going to have, so things like that?
Yeah, and really we start, and that's kind of, and every program handles it a little differently when it comes to how far out are you recruiting, and how they call them committable offers. That's a big thing you hear out, and obviously when you're recruiting those younger guys, you're obviously looking athletically, if they fit obviously the mold and fit your program, and then get to know them a little bit. But you're really you got those better relationships, obviously, and NCAA rule obviously permits certain things. Obviously, right now we can't talk to 25s. It just a little ways ago, we were able to talk to 24s now. So really, we're starting that relationship building process. But again, we're really just looking at overall athletic ability at a lot of those positions and seeing if they fit our mold. We're putting, offers out there. But a lot of times people are making those decisions this early. So we don't have to really know exactly where our numbers are when it comes to those positions quite yet for the class. But we do know, hey, if we do have a safety spot, this is a guy we definitely, or if we have, this type of spot open, we definitely want to obviously, look at this kid. He's an offerable kid. So that's kind of where that starts with the 24s. But yeah, it's very challenging to look that far out. But at the same time, when you build that relationship early, that goes a long way deep into the recruiting process. You kind of always have to get that at least started and get your kind of foot in the game with those guys down the road.
So a big topic everywhere in college football is conference realignment. And I'm got to imagine you're asked about it. The team's asked about it on the recruiting trail. I mean, how do you respond to recruits considering San Diego State has been at the center of everyone's predictions and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. And that's kind of, albeit it's funny you say that. With certain articles or when certain things are released. And that's kind of what we always reference. Obviously, when it comes to our program, we're never going to put out something and put a rumor mill and stuff like that. We're always going to use hopefully factual items because as recruiting is, that's ultimately the recruits are doing their homework and fact checking because everybody's obviously selling their own programs. So the nice part is, with conference realignment, if you go out there on the internet or go out there or anywhere you search us, there's a lot of people talking about us in that conversation. So it's something we're not just, making up internally or trying to sell to a recruit. This is real talk when it comes to, obviously, there's major networks putting out that we are in those discussions or in those mentions. So obviously our athletic director has come out and made statements that we are obviously in conversation and those different things. So there's obviously things that we reference and try to keep it factual when it comes to the referencing of that. But yeah, I can tell you when it kind of, I'm going to say it hit national networks. That was about I think it was last Monday is where it really picked up. We had people, and I'll be the first to say, we had people, major recruits hitting that may have not been somewhat interested, but now are interested. And to be honest, some don't honestly realize what the transitional period will be. Some think it flips overnight when that stuff happens. We obviously know that it doesn't, but it's exciting. Obviously, that excitement builds a lot of things we can kind of carry on to with especially the freshman class, high school kids specifically, because by the time they're here and you talk 24s right there, again, they'd be a year removed if that was the case. If we were entering, if it takes 2 years, that's kind of always the timeline I think in my head. But again, those guys are really they'll be real for them. We'll be in the conference at that point if that's the case, if that's the route we went. So again, definitely helps in recruiting. We definitely reference it, and again, but we try to keep it obviously very factual.
Very, very interesting. Another huge selling point, obviously, Snapdragon Stadium. And I guess there's multiple elements to this for years, right? Playing up in Carson, just having that opportunity to have local kids be able to come to a game is huge. But could you just touch a little bit, I guess, on that, and then also touch on just the demand of recruits wanting to come see the stadium and how all of that, those visits and things like that are going?
Yeah, and it's funny, and obviously I took over for Matt here as of recent in the last season. So hearing him, and I was very close with Matt and got to ask questions. I still ask him questions to this day. He still lives in San Diego, and the different dynamic of not just Carson, but obviously at Qualcomm prior to was the ticket demand and all those things were a lot. You had a lot more obviously availability. So there was no denial. It was actually an open link. So we've actually had to change our process when it comes to ticket request and recruiting in general. It is all I would say, I'm going to say invite basis, but at the same time, we start locally. We obviously are always going to start locally when it comes to that. And obviously, but we can't, it's not unlimited just with the seating capacities and all those different things when it comes to Snapdragon. So it definitely has created obviously excitement when the recruits come. Obviously, it's a huge selling point. We've had multiple recruits that have visited all different Power Fives and obviously have been blown away by Snapdragon. So that is definitely whether it's always hard choosing if we're going to start with it or end with it. To be honest with you, on visits and different items, because that's always a debate. Do you want to go out with a bang or do you want to start with a bang? It's kind of always the debate we have. And again, we're having events out there with official visits. We got official visits coming up. We've been having lunches out there with our top official visits during the season. So we actually have that prior to the game. We're out on the pier. We have a lunch out there with the families and with the recruiting staff. And we have a big event coming up in December for a big official visit in the 8th and 9th. So those, again, we are definitely going to use that facility as much as possible because obviously it's a wow factor for us.
You mentioned Matt Rosano, your predecessor. He did a great job in that role. What aspects of his approach were you careful to make sure to continue when you took over that role?
Yeah, a lot, to be honest with you. That was and obviously and I'll be the first to admit, I had a lot of learning to do in this job. I was not in recruiting prior, so there was a lot. One of the things I leaned on. Obviously, people have wisdom in this area, and also coaches. Coach Horton is a guy I lean on, but Matt obviously did a lot of great things. His classes speak for himself, and the people that he helped bring into the program. But again, his biggest thing, honestly, was he had a great system in place when it comes to the processes and letting those play out. And obviously, and we call it hallway recruiting, is what, you don't want those things where you're just throwing things out there and there's not much sticking. There's got to be a process and organization to it. So it's not just, some people think it's just talking to people and getting that done. No, it's got to be a time, we use ARM software as the software we use, and it's got to be very dialed in from a, organization standpoint. So I would say that was the biggest thing, is making sure the major things were not dropped. And I'm a creative mind. That's one thing, background that I came from. I helped Matt in recruiting when it came to that stuff. So those things I knew I wouldn't struggle in when it comes to come up with creative solutions, graphics and all those different little things, nuances that you try to do to make it special. That wasn't the area of it. Was more of the organization and the processes, is carry on exactly what he had set up in those systems and obviously learn them. It wasn't just carry on. I had to learn them to start and then go from there. So.
Yeah, you mentioned the graphics part. I believe when we had Matt on the podcast earlier when he was in the role, he did mention how you were part of that social media team, that the graphics, a lot of the recruits get certain, welcomes or have a good week or things like that. Just tell us what part you played in that.
Yeah. So originally, I would say when I first came here 3 seasons ago, that was a piece that I dabbled in. Honestly, it was when I first got into football or athletics in general and coaching and all those different things. It was one of those things that was just becoming very big in college football. So it was one of those things that I self-taught myself off YouTube, just because it was one of those things I kind of got my foot in the door that way. Places, if you had experience in that, they kind of wanted you to be a part of the staff. So I used it as something to kind of separate myself originally when I got into the industry. And then I carried on. Then I got to meet a lot of people and network with a lot of people in this industry that really was in graphic and creative media. And so I built a lot of relationships that way. And so once I got in and got into different roles, I saw a notice here that, we needed to get somebody in a role, and Justin Truong, who's really done a fantastic job for us last year. He's actually been an intern. I'm not going to speak ahead of schedule, but hopefully here soon, he may be on our staff. So we'll see. But that, again, he is a game changer for us, not only for our recruiting, but also just with NIL and all the different stuff. The access to media for our current players, and the amount of photos. I mean, if you go through, and Skull Sparks is a company that evaluates creative media across the country. There was a stat put out last year of how much interactions we had changed over the last year and how much generation social media wise. And that plays into recruiting. And that's why I reference that. I know it's team related, but again, them seeing our brand and them seeing us and our football program, obviously going throughout the schools is huge. So that's kind of the part that I played. Is kind of, I was the middleman after I was the starting piece. I was really building the graphics, doing it all video wise initially. And then really have just been managing more or less now with Jamie. And obviously Jamie does a phenomenal job, but there's a certain amount of manpower. And with how college football trended, you got to have someone that's doing recruiting pieces, game invites. You do the good lucks every week. And we do, obviously you do mass producing of that type of stuff. So it's a lot of work that goes into it. But right now is more or less, again, Justin does a phenomenal job for us. And I kind of just oversee, try to get ideas to him. We just made a new name badge, so we're really excited about. We met with a company called Ghost Mail. They do a bunch of different creative media stuff that they come up with ideas. So again, it's just kind of the overseeing piece of that is what I'm more involved in.
Yeah, we're really appreciative of Justin. He really treats our media people really, really well on the field, and those relationships and stuff. But NIL, one-time transfer rule. The conversations a year ago was, man, what is this thing going to be? How is it going to work? Being a year fully into it, what is it that you, I guess, know now that maybe you didn't know when this process started?
It's funny you reference a year, and I would reference something I don't know a day ago about it. So it just again, it's forever changing. Obviously, Michelle, who's our NIL coordinator, has done a phenomenal job being very informational on it, and being very kind of keeping us up to speed. Now, that doesn't always correlate to deals, and obviously being on top of it when it comes to recruiting and all those different things. And Coach Oak will be the first to say, and that'll be an off-season thing you'll hear come from our program a lot. It is something that we've got to always be improving in, and we are going to be pushing the collective that a former player of ours has started, which is now legal to do. So I can speak on that now, which previously that rule recently just came out about 2 weeks ago, that we were more able to speak on those types of items. So we're going to be pushing things like that because it is a game changer for us. Again, you're going to see on my social media, I retweeted a deal that came from that recently. You're going to see my retweets of all those guys that were posting on deals that are coming from a collective of ours. You're going to see that a lot more in college football in general of pushing people towards that, because it is, again, a game changer when it comes to recruitment. When we're bringing these kids on official visits, we're not selling, again, you legally are not selling them that they're going to come here and make money on it. You're just showing what your current team is doing. That's ultimately all you can do when it comes to legalities behind the NCAA, is really just showing them, hey, what our current team does. Whether you would do that when you get here or not is kind of that's the game that the recruits have to play. They're kind of, do they trust you that when they get here, they're going to be doing something similar? They're going to get involved. And we're not really, again, not involved in that deal. It's with that collective. If they continue to do those deals, hopefully that's the route. But that's our encouragement. We can promote it. Now we can obviously encourage people to give to those types of funds. But again, it's a game changer. It gets brought up in every recruiting discussion I ever have now, whether they're really interested in it or not. It at least gets brought up, and then it's really navigating that space of trying to make sure you're not saying something that's going to get you in trouble. And ultimately, that's the factual. I try to watch what I say on that space a lot, and I get Michelle involved because she's really the expert on it, and she comes in on our official visit and speaks on it. It gives the factual numbers behind, the different items that she's working through with all of our athletes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would try and research for this, like, the NCAA coming in with guidelines, blowing everything up, and then rescinding those guidelines and all the stuff that's around. It's amazing. I want to talk a little about preferred walk-ons. I mean, San Diego State has had such a great, Mekhi Shaw had an amazing game this past week, and Jesse Matthews obviously coming that same route. I mean, year after year, there's these preferred walk-ins who are doing great things. How does that process of identifying those players, and is there like a limit to the number of that you can have? Could you just kind of give us an overview on preferred walk-ons?
Yes, so it goes kind of a little bit back to, it's kind of the second tier, but very similar process to kind of what I said initially was you really have to evaluate how many spots you have, because there is a roster limit. Our roster limit is 115 on total roster. So, and that obviously plays into a lot of different factors of why that is there. That's not the NCAA rule, but that is the university rule, just with Title IX, all those different items, depending on what sports. So different universities have different roster limits. And then again, you go back to NIL, I'll reference this quickly. You go back to NIL, like, the BYU, for example, they released that all their walk-ons are, having, tuition covered. So you got those different discussions, but we treat walk-ons process very similar to our scholarship process. It just happens after the scholarship process. So once we're filled up here, hopefully, again, we want to get everybody signed in this first signing period. That's always the goal. And then obviously you're saving some spots for the portal. So you've always got that kind of playing in a nuance a little bit. But once that kind of happens and you got your high school guys and your younger guys that you've solidified signed with you, then we really start to dive into, okay, how many walk-ons are we really taking? Now, we've already identified, roughly how many walk-ons are graduating at each position. So we kind of know we build a little bit of relationship, but we really amp it up right after the signing day. The first signing day, and then kind of really just look at it, because ultimately those kids also may be signing FCS and making those decisions or going to a different program, and then we kind of know who's still out there when it comes to looking interested in being a walk-on. So that kind of is transpiring now as we speak. To be honest with you, we're really starting to talk walk-ons, and we really start local with both scholarship and walk-ons. And walk-ons are unique. One, there may be unique situations, whether they're, they get Pell money and or they get, there may be military. There may be things that help walk-on stick better, because ultimately it is expensive to go to college regardless of where you go. So ultimately, is it something that longevity wise cannot, unfortunately not every walk-on earns a scholarship. And so those discussions of trying to make sure that this is the right fit and longevity play into to walk-on opportunities. And again, those types of things we have with those families, and say, hey, is this something that we truly need to evaluate? Is this something that can work for you? Happens, and then again, we're looking for talented walk-on. That's the start of it all. Obviously, our ultimate goal is to get talented football players, and obviously, academics. Obviously, academics play a huge role in that. Hopefully, they're high academic students, and they need to be high academic students. One, because that'll help them with the financials. Hopefully, they're getting an academic scholarship or different items there. But again, I'll reference NIL again. We'd love to help our walk-ons initially as much as we can when it comes to NIL. So that's ultimately an easier conversation when for a place like BYU to get a walk-on, because they're financially helping them.
You mentioned a few times about the transfer portal, how that impacts high school recruitment. The transfer stuff happens really quick, right? When the portal opens, some guys are committing like that same day, right? So how do you, that urgency that you need to have, how does that impact your process, especially when it's coinciding with early signing day?
Yeah, and this is new. This is brand new with the obviously the 2 periods when it's going to be open. That's new as of this year. So to answer your question, how we're going to navigate it is still up for debate. We have a plan, obviously, right now as we speak. But when bullets start flying and 12-5 hits and this thing starts going, and you start seeing all these names flood in, and obviously grad transfers right now can enter. So we're in contact with a few kids right now as we speak that are technically in the portal just because they're considered grad, which they can enter any time right now. So it's a little conversation there. But on 12-5, our plan that we have to attack it, between Coach Hogan and I, we've discussed how we're going to go about that, and then we'll go from there. But yeah, it's going to be a very unique situation. Again, positional needs is the very first starting point, as I referenced. But again, when I say positional needs, it's also positional needs of looking at, you have a bunch of young guys, because most of the time transfer portal, obviously they're either going to have 2, maybe some 1 year remaining, some 3, obviously, but most of the time they're not, they're going to have 4 years. So you're really looking at, hey, where are you maybe lacking on the roster from an older standpoint, or guys with eligibility left, because you're trying to obviously spread the love. You never want to, that's with roster management in general. You never want to have to be reloading from a standpoint of really having to go out and get a bunch of older guys, because that means you didn't spread your roster well enough, where you recruited, in certain areas well enough throughout the time. So you really want, your freshmen to be the next ones up, right? You want to build your roster that way, where it's transitioning kind of naturally. So again, that's always evaluated is, hey, where did we lack positionally? Maybe we didn't do a good enough job in this class, or we lost. There was attrition. People entered the portal and or are short at certain positions at this, older guys may be very youthful at a certain position. That's really where we're attacking the transfer portal and saying, hey, well, this is where we have a need next year. And then ultimately, again, COVID years play into that very heavily. So there's a lot of discussion. We have not had those discussions with our current players yet. The Jalen Mayden is the one discussion that has been released that has happened. And that was because, it was brought up by both parties. And he agreed to he wanted to go ahead and make that decision. But we try to have those conversations afterwards. So we don't know exactly some of the older guys are headed that have COVID years left.
When in the preseason, we had a chance to talk to Coach Hoke. We asked him why, he hired you into your role, and he spoke about you knowing what he wants in recruits. What does Coach Hoke want?
Yeah, it's always going to start with character first, and obviously coming from I've been around him my whole life. I grew up. My dad was on his staff for about 13 years. I was raised very similar from a standpoint of I was around his program all the time. And I knew 2 things about him. One, he was built on toughness and getting tough football players here. And then also, again, character is always going to come first, because in times of trouble or times of adversity, it's always going to kind of prevail. So that's always one thing I've always known about him. He's a great man, a great husband, a great father. So that's always where it's always going to start. We're looking for those type of people to build, obviously, high character people. And so he always said that's the thing he told me around when he hired me in this job was that's what I'm going to be coming at you about. And that's the standards he's going to hold me to is really evaluating those first three things. Obviously, we want good football players and we want guys who are obviously high academic students to earn their degree. But first and foremost, my job is to evaluate, are they a good character fit and fit this program's mold? And so that's one thing that I do all the time. That's all I'm doing. I'm on the conversation, learning what these prospective student athletes are about. And that's where I would say I do understand where Coach Hope's coming from of what he wants from that angle. And again, that's the conversation. Now, what he's looking athletically, those conversations happen all the time, and those change sometimes. So I just have those constantly. But the character and what we're looking for as an Aztec warrior does not change, and what the personality and the outside stuff. So.
A few weeks ago at the UNLV game, I had a pair of strangers, grandparents, come up and say, "Hey, man, how does my grandson get recruited better?" And I gave them an answer, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. I want to see if you were asked that question, what does a high school kid need to do to be able to elevate himself to being in that recruiting process?
Yeah, I get asked this question. It's probably the number one question I get asked because obviously there's so many. And again, I'm from the Midwest originally. I'm from Indiana originally. I moved around. Obviously, I was a coach's kid. I bounced around. So when I came, I didn't realize how many high schools. Again, we looked at this. There's more high schools in the city of LA than there is in all of Indiana. So I laughed about that when we looked that up. I actually thought maybe San Diego might be in comparison, but there is more in Indiana than San Diego. But LA, there is more. But that question's asked. Obviously, the amount of prospects there are all the time is how do I get noticed? How do I get this? The number one thing that I've now come to a realization of being in this and coaches want to catch a coach's eye or be about is in person, being seen in person, either showing up to the office for an unofficial, whether if you think you're being under recruited and the coach isn't getting back to you because, you're getting emails all day, you're getting all this, there's services, all those things. Football camps, summer camps are huge that I've noticed to get noticed at, again, because those services are all there. All the different recruiting services are all at these camps, getting your name out there. And then also coming to game visits, showing up on unofficials, showing up in the office. I mean, people that show up in the office in person is by far the number one way to get noticed. Now, I'm not saying everyone can do that. Obviously, there's distance, there's travel restrictions, all those different things. But in COVID, unfortunately stopped a lot of that at one point. It was all virtual. We didn't even have people that hadn't even seen campus that showed up on, first day of classes, hadn't even seen campus during those times. So that is the number one way, in my opinion. The emails, the Twitter, and now Twitter is probably the biggest communication piece, I will say. Email is starting to die a little bit when it comes to that. You get emails, and only because a lot of time, honestly, some of those things are flooded into the spam or junk and not even end up in those, just because really email is starting to tag, anything that looks repetitive that they're blasting out to multiple people, it goes into spam sometimes. So I would say Twitter is the best when it comes to messaging if you're trying to reach somebody. And then film wise, again, that's an art. I call it an art because initially we're always going to start out with a highlight. But our staff specifically, we are huge on watching full game film. The subscription service we have with Huddle, we have access to all high school full game film wherever in California, all the recruiting states, Arizona, et cetera, Nevada. And so when we get those highlight tapes, you choosing those key clips, those clips matter because that's going to get our initial eval. And we're going to say, hey, we really need to take a look at this kid. And then we're going to start watching full game tape on that kid. So your clip choice and what you put on film ultimately is always, and I was told this by so many guys on staff when I initially got here, what you see on film is what you're going to get. You can't convince yourself anything else. You got to see what on film, and that's always what you're going to get. They may be sometimes 6'5" and look the part. You may have seen them in person, but what they show on film is who they are. So we always start with that piece too, is film is huge. What you put on tape is what you're going to be judged by a little bit. So
I like my answer. That's what I told him. I said, get a huddle, reach out to these coaches on Twitter. I did not tell him to come show up at your office, but now I will. So you already mentioned the perfect lead into the next question. We ran a few articles about the summer camp and the winners of the passing camp and things of that nature this past summer, and just we're kind of blown away by how many, just the praise that these coaches who go to multiples of these talked about, just organizationally, the feel, etc. From a recruiting piece, what do these camps mean? And then a follow up with that, you talked about COVID. COVID didn't allow these local kids to have the opportunity to do it. And so just for the community of San Diego, in general, football community, to be able to get on campus and participate in those camps.
Yeah, it was huge. We had a massive turnout, and social media played a little bit in that too. Why we think I think we had almost 300 more kids than we ever have had this last year. And I think we did a better job of obviously getting it out there that it's available. But ultimately, recruiting, I'll start with recruiting wise of how we kind of handle camps is one, Coach Hoke is huge that a camp is not just an evaluation camp. There are camps out there that is straight evaluation from a recruiting standpoint. Our camp is not so that. Do we use it for evaluation? Absolutely. We obviously meet and find out who's coming to the camp. And then we're really trying to, obviously there's day of guys that show up and perform, and we're really getting them on the board. That's what we just talked about a little bit. How do you want to get noticed? We've took a ton of kids from camp that, checked a lot of boxes for us and got on our board. So we're kind of going around and got radios and I'm getting those days for me. I'm riding on a golf cart and I'm all around the place, making sure I'm seeing guys if a position coach. But Coach Hoke is huge. Our camp is also a developmental camp. And it is not just about them coming to be recruited and seen and get a couple reps here and there. It is to be coached and be a better football player when they leave our camp. So I think a lot of people appreciate that about our camp. We are going to probably end up doing 2 skills camps this go around because of the size, the demand we had. And we want it to be very individualized from the stance of you don't just come to our camp and get 1 to 2 reps in the camp because it's so big and there's huge long lines and the one-on-ones and all those. So we are going to probably do an A and a PM session for that sole purpose of to make sure the kids are getting coached. The kids are obviously learning something when they leave here. So I would say that's a huge emphasis of Coach Hoke's when we met on camps. And Ruben obviously led the charge in the camp area, but that was a huge sticking point for him. It's not just a recruiting camp. This is a developmental camp as well. And then next, and I would say after that, really the organization piece of that is you kind of be oriented. There's so many, kids out there. When we travel to all these different prospect camps in the summer, it's being organized from our standpoint of making sure we've got lists of the, updated list of the registration list so we know exactly, hey, if we need to get eyes on somebody that we liked on tape and they've already said we already have a relationship with, but we need to see in person. Maybe they're from Texas. We only got one chance to see them. We're going to the TCU camp or whatnot. Those camps throughout are huge. And it's got to be super organized to make sure that obviously, because again, there's so many kids, our coaches can't miss them because it's our only chance to see them maybe in person, kind of make your money's worth of that traveling a coach all the way to Texas to see them. So again, that's the piece there. And then what it meant to San Diego, I think it was huge. And I think I know we're talking about possibly doing a youth camp as well, which I think will help the community too, which will be obviously for kids not in recruitable age, high school age. So I think it was huge from a San Diego. I think it was massive turnout. Got to see a lot more local talent and talk about, again, possibly whether they're not a scholarship guy to help being a walk-on, maybe getting eyes on those guys. But a community I thought really rallied around it. And I think they were impressed by being coached and an organization. It wasn't a waste of time or just a money-grabbing camp is what I like to call it. It's not meant for that. That's not what we're hoping it to be. And if, again, we even said, I think the most feedback we got was it was a very positive camp from that, but we also self-evaluated and said, hey, if it's going to continue to grow, we're going to have to split it into 2 to make sure we keep our integrity when it comes to that, those items.
So San Diego State obviously had a big coaching change on the offensive side mid-season. Coach Heklinski as the offensive coordinator played a big part in recruiting. So how did the program transition from a recruiting standpoint with that coaching change?
Yep, and I'll be the first to say is I was very close with Coach Eklinski again. He was on the staffs that my dad was on growing up, so I obviously was with Coach Hoke for a long time. So I was very close with him. And Coach Eklinski was a heck of a recruiter. Don't let it again. If anybody knows that one thing about him too is he was a fantastic recruiter and always involved and always trying to be kind of cutting edge with stuff. So obviously, when that all transpired, it's not an easy conversation across the board. It's also not an easy conversation when things are struggling with recruits. That's all a discussion that happens every week. I'm calling, coaches are calling all these kids every week to talk to them and still build that relationship. And you get those questions. Not every recruit asks it. Some of the recruits obviously are a little hesitant to ask harder questions like that. But again, it was something you obviously have to address. We addressed it as one thing. We were not we did not hide behind doors or anything like that. I've tried not to even talk about it. We came out and said, this is kind of the direction we headed. This is who we're bringing in. At that time, obviously explained who Coach Lindley was, and obviously being a former Aztec and hopefully what he was bringing and kind of move forward. That was ultimately what we had to do, is just ultimately move forward. And now it's been fun to, obviously, over this last week's phone call for me calling receivers and quarterbacks and all those. It's a lot from funner conversation when you get to say, hey, look what so and so is doing. So those conversations become easier, obviously, if you're performing on the field. But ultimately, too, you try to say, recruiting is kind of whatever angle you're going to take at it. Ultimately, too, if you're underperforming, there's people that are selling that that's why we need you. You're coming in for that reason. So that's, you got maybe early playing time, those types of things. That's all recruiting really is. It becomes an angled conversation of what your program's currently state is and kind of trying to angle that to be, hey, this is why we're recruiting you to be for that next bill, or, hey, you're going to just come right in. And I'll be the first to say, like, I reference Shavers a lot of times for a long body receiver. If we're talking to a long receiver who can stretch the field, I'm going to reference guys we have. I'm like, hey, look, Shavers is graduating. We need somebody that can come in and do this. Those are the types of conversations you have with those types of items.
Yeah, both Paul and I have had a chance to chat with a lot of high school recruits, commits, before they come on campus. And I would say 100% of them talk about how they feel like San Diego State is honest with them and truthful and transparent, and how it's a family atmosphere. And before any of the football stuff, that's the kind of stuff that gravitates them to San Diego State. And that's definitely something you and your staff and the entire coaching staff and the players have done, just cultivating that culture for sure.
Absolutely. I would say that's a main feedback we get, because ultimately, too, is those are harder conversations. There's our hard conversations in recruiting, always are, just with how the kind of realm is. But I think people at the end of the day like the transparency and really sit back and appreciate it, whether it's telling them what they need to hear rather than what they want to hear, is always usually our approach.
All right. Last question. You mentioned you're from the Midwest and you had some experience with Coach Hoke. For those that may not know, can you give us a quick background on how you got into this industry and what brought you to San Diego State?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, so I was a coach's kid. I moved around. My dad's Mark Smith, was with Coach Hoke. My dad was coaching at Indiana State. And then when Coach Hoke went to Ball State as the head coach, brought my dad on. He was the linebackers coach there, and then transitioned to be the defensive coordinator there for the last couple of years that they were at Ball State. They then came out here to San Diego State the first time. I'm in high school at that time. I went to freshman year here at Rancho Bernardo High School. So I was a freshman here at Rancho Bernardo for freshman and sophomore year. Then they went out to Michigan after that. And so then transpired out to Michigan. It was obviously being a family atmosphere on our coaching staff, which still is the case. Obviously, very, very tight-knit coaching staff and family-oriented. So obviously Coach Hoke was like another father to me in some ways. I'll never forget when I actually got mono my senior year, and my dad made me go speak to him because I was so upset I had to miss my final game my senior year. And Coach Hoke's the one that talked me out from going crazy. So again, he was like a second father to me when it comes to some of that stuff. But again, I always was around the program. I learned a lot of life lessons, just seeing how he operated the program, how he ran the program. And then, so then I knew I always wanted to go into coaching. So I actually started out as a student coach at a very small private university called Siena Heights University. So I actually got a scholarship to coach, which is a really unique opportunity. So I was a student coach coming fresh out. I was coaching kids older than me. Right when I went there, I was on the defensive side. I was the outside linebackers coach for an NIL level school. And again, was getting a scholarship to coach. Went 4 years there, loved every second of it. Grew a lot of lifelong relationships in the industry. And then kind of got out of it. And I really sat down and said, is coaching, obviously finished college and just coaching something I really want to do. I thought I had a space in college football, but I didn't know if it was coaching. I thought, just with my attributes that I brought, I didn't know if it felt fit being a coach. So I transitioned into operations at Florida Tech. My father was actually there at the time. That was a Division II program down in Melbourne, Florida. Went there for basically did an internship, and then went right into, they hired me out of my internship for 1 semester. I was there for 1 semester, and then actually my dad, again, knew the head coach at Indiana State, who was with Coach Hoke at Michigan. He was his DB coach. And they had an intro level operations job become available there. So I went FCS right after that, and then became the director of football operations there. Was there for 3 seasons. And then, again, Coach Hoke transpired, obviously got back into being a head coach. Had 3 years of experience in operations, had heard he had an assistant operations job open up out here. And then again, kind of moved out from that standpoint. And it was, story kind of continues from there. And then obviously was here for 2 seasons as the assistant under Ruben. And then again, recruiting opened up, and it was something that I've always known I have had a spot in football and obviously in college football, but it was one of those things where I'm still to this day am figuring out exactly where I fit, but I did love everything about recruiting. And I thought I obviously, my experience of seeing it all, I knew a lot of the different items, and I was always involved in recruiting and operations at Indiana State. Obviously, being an FCS program in Division II, you're dealing with kind of everything. So I handle all the recruiting operations when it comes to, the different official visits, meal bookings, all that stuff. So I had kind of experience when it came to all of those items. It was more of the eval stuff that I would say was newer to me, truly evaluation. But then I also started as a coach. So I always thought I had some experience in those items, but that's been the biggest thing. And I'll be the first to admit it, I lean on a lot of guys on this staff. And I will continue to always lean on guys on the staff of really learning every day of what this dynamic is. And I lean on both older and younger coaches. You kind of have 2 different worlds going on sometimes of how their techniques and mottos and all those different things. And again, Coach Horton, I will tell you repeatedly, if you ask how many times I go down to his office to lean on him and hear the different items, he's experienced. I mean, talk about a guy who has wisdom in recruiting and all different items. I use those guys. You got to use those guys. If not, then you're just being stubborn and hard-headed and think you start to become that, you're not forever learning. So that's kind of the ultimate goal with me. But that's how I got here to San Diego State.
Awesome. Yeah, we've learned that recruiting is definitely, there's no off season in recruiting. And so, keeps you busy. And obviously right now with early signing period is one of the busier times, but we definitely appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and giving us a chance to kind of pick your brain on recruiting, 101.
No, absolutely. It's great to talk with you guys, and I appreciate everything you guys do for our program.
Thanks.
Oh, man. Thank you.
Our next special guest is Marquise Pierson, who is the older cousin of San Diego State starting quarterback Jalen Mayden. Aztec Nation on Twitter will know him under his Twitter handle, Coach Quise. He has definitely been active and very supportive of Jalen and all of San Diego State sports, football particularly. And so it was a great opportunity to get a chance to chat with him and to learn a little bit more about Jalen and the family they come from. So I hope you guys enjoy that. We want to welcome Marquise Pierson to the SDSU Football Podcast. How are you doing today, man?
Doing good, man. Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
Aztec Nation on Twitter knows you as Coach Quise, and I believe you're related to quarterback Jalen Mayden. Can you tell us how you're related to him?
Jalen is actually my younger cousin. I'm actually the oldest. More like a nephew. I'm 36, so more of the older cousin. Seen him grow up. Um, but yeah, he's my cousin, and got to see him play a little bit this past weekend. So that was pretty fun.
Yeah, that's a good follow into our first real question is you were in San Diego to catch the game. I believe it was your first time in San Diego, is that right?
It was my very first time. It was me, my fiance, our kids, Jalen's little sister. She was with us, and our grandma. So first time, I enjoy it, and it was great. Weather was great. I don't know about those gas prices though, but I'm still paying $2.98 out here. So
Wow.
Don't rub it in. Don't rub it in.
We'll get into the football game, but like just in terms of being in San Diego, I think on Instagram I saw you might have gone to SeaWorld, might have done some other stuff. How was that experience?
man, it was great. The kids loved it. It was me and my fiance's first time going there. It was the kids' first time, and just to actually see it. I mean, we have a SeaWorld here, but that's in San Antonio, which is a little bit a ways from Dallas. Not too far, but it was just amazing. It was great. I wanted to go to the zoo. I think Jalen had mentioned the zoo, but just didn't have enough time to get around to it. But it was great. Kids loved it. We had a fun, good time. Then they had a fireworks show
Mm.
at the end. So it was awesome. I loved it.
That's awesome, man. Tell us about what you thought about Snapdragon Stadium. I think you were a mini celebrity there.
Man, the amount of people that was coming up to us, that was kind of crazy. But it was an awesome stadium. It was a lot going on. I met the sons of Montezuma. Went out and met them,
Yeah.
and then he was telling us about the food trucks, and the kids got to experience all the little games. What is it, the Villa or something like that?
Aztec Village. Yep.
Village.
There you go, Aztec Village. So it was just a lot. It kind of was like a mini Jerry World.
Okay.
That's kind of like how I looked at it, but it was just a lot. It was a great experience, and yeah, it was fun.
Good, man. So the game, it doesn't get off the greatest start, right? Jalen throws an interception on first drive. But big things turned around. He obviously had a great game, named Mountain West Player of the Week. What was it like just watching him ball out on the D1 level like that?
For us, as the family, we've watched Jalen do this growing up, and he has two older brothers too that we've watched growing up and playing, and our whole family in general. We're just a sports family from professionals to collegiate level to myself and my younger brother. We're older now, but so watching him, it was nothing like, oh, this is us back in the backyard as kids playing. But man, being there and watching him actually do what we all known that he could do, and in person, it was amazing. It's kind of stressful. I kind of put myself like with his mom. Sometimes if you guys can see the way his mom watches the games, it's kind of funny because she's a nervous wreck because she's like, oh, don't mess up. Okay, don't do this. Or she's texting my phone. Oh my God, I can't watch this. So watching it in person, man, I don't know. I think I kind of got her feel a little bit because, you kind of hear everybody sitting around you and they know that we're there for Jalen. And like, he threw that interception and I kind of, I'm like, oh no. And then I'm just like looking around and everybody's coming. Oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. He's fine. This is great. He's in a great place. We're going to get it back. And then the game turned around and it was great. It was a great feeling.
I want to go back to Jalen in high school. He was a 4-star quarterback out of Texas. I think one of the highest rated quarterbacks in his class. How good of a quarterback was he in high school?
Jalen was awesome in high school. He was the number one dual threat, and which I never really got why they labeled him a dual threat. Because if y'all really know Jalen, he does not like to run. His favorite quarterback was Tom Brady. So he really wants to throw the ball. But in high school, out here in Texas, football is everything. So he was in a spread. He ran that RPO offense, but they wanted Jalen to throw the ball, and he just so happens to run a 4.4. So when he did run, people wasn't catching him. So I believe he went to Saxe High School, and he had like almost all the records out there that was being broke by his older brother's class, James Jr. He is a 2014 class, and that class was ridiculous. And I mean, the quarterback then, his name was Kent, and he was actually a quarterback at Utah State years ago. And Kent had like all of the Saxy records, and then Jalen came along as a freshman, had coming in sophomore, and was just like breaking records left and right. So they labeled him a dual threat just because he was running, and he was getting all these passing yards. But we would just laugh as the family, like, he doesn't really want to run, guys. Like, but you had Trevor Lawrence and all of them who was like already the 5-star pocket passer. So they went, okay, well, he's going to be a dual threat. Just kind of that dual threat just kind of came about his high school. But his high school career was crazy.
He signed and went to Mississippi State. There was a coaching change there. Didn't quite work out for him. Jalen said a couple weeks ago that it was his older brother Jared who knew Nick Imbernati, who's one of the recruiting guys for San Diego State from a prior football tournament, and then he made the connection. When he decided to transfer to San Diego State, what did you and the rest of the family know about San Diego State, and what did you think of that decision?
I know, me personally, me and his mom, his mom, she tries to stay out of it as much as she can. I didn't know anything about San Diego State. I knew a little bit because I coach club volleyball. So we play a lot of at our national tournaments. We play some of the club teams from San Diego. So that's pretty much all I knew was about volleyball. So when the news broke, he sent the group message to the family and was like, I'm going to go to San Diego. I instantly had texted my aunt and I was like, where is he going? And so I started doing the Googling, and I was getting on it, and I was like, okay. And I was kind of confused because I was like, they're a running team. Like, they don't really throw the ball a lot. So it was a little surprise for me, but we've always let the boys, pick where they want to go, decide what they want to do. And, the Mississippi State thing, that was just, that was hard for the family, but he stuck it out as long as he could, and all the coaching changes and just everything that went on just led him to San Diego.
So then, he's in San Diego. He didn't get a chance to play his, last year. He finishes 4th on the depth chart at the end of the year, and then they move him to safety. I guess just what was that process like for the family? Watching that from a distance and encouraging him, etc.
At first, we're always going to be behind him. When it comes to supporting each other as far as the sports go. It was just, texting, sending him a little text, hey, keep your head up, don't let it discourage you. But then when it came out that he was actually going to safety, surprised by me, but I was like, all right, hit your brother up.
Mm-hmm.
Your brother's in the league right now. So text him and let's, see what he's got to say. So I think him and Jared was sending film to each other. He was helping him out. His older brother James is a coach right now at a Division III level. So he was texting, sending him stuff. I was just kind of in the background a little bit. I didn't want to bother him too much because he already got all that going on. And but mentally, like my grandma, and, she texts him every day at a certain time. It's like, hey, a little Bible verse or something like that. And just kind of keeping his head up. But when I saw him get in that defense, I was like, oh, he's making tackles. Like,
Right.
And he's big. Like, he's really making tackles. I think he had 7 tackles or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was excited. I like, all right, well, we got Jared on the defense. Now I got Jalen, and then all of a sudden he's back at quarterback. So it's just kind of funny how that works out.
It's absolutely incredible. And just personally for me, I've been this entire story, I haven't seen anything like it. I mean, I've seen players transfer back to a position for depth, but never to play right away and then to just be an absolute star, right? But the most impressive part was talking to him at SDSU Pro Day, just on the side, like a casual conversation. And he was telling me, he was just very humble about it, was telling me about getting the film from his brother and going through some of that stuff. Then he comes back after the Hawaii game, and I'm asking him, man, how did you stay fresh? Did you stay fresh throwing the ball? What did you? And he's like, no, man, I was all in on playing safety. How proud of him are you for the character that he showed and being able to, be selfless, do what's best for the team, and then to be rewarded like he has been?
Oh man, I'm extremely proud. I don't know a lot of athletes. Being a former athlete myself, I don't know a lot of athletes that had, the star power that he had coming out of high school. Being a number one recruit, being that could do what he did.
Right.
Especially now with the portal and all of that and the NIL stuff. Because that wasn't a thing at first with Jalen. And I don't know how many athletes that could just really do that, change positions, stay humble, and just really, really take hold of, I'm going all in this defense position. Because he was really bought in, and he didn't throw a single ball. He had bulked up, slimmed down a little bit. He got cut just so he could move faster and all that. And so, that is just humbling. And, he took it. And, I'm real proud of him. And I told him that when I was out there, I was like, dude, what you're doing out here, this story is amazing. And like, you just got to keep balling.
Yeah. You mentioned that you don't know how many athletes could be like that. I think there probably could fit them on one hand, man. It's absolutely remarkable. Just like you said, the humility and everything that he's doing, man. It's really great.
One of the things that Paul and I could see when we go to practice last year, and the coaches have talked a lot about in the last month, is just how his demeanor, how cool, calm, collected he is, not just on the field but off the field. Is that a family thing? Where does that come from? Is everybody in the family always cool, calm, and collected?
Hold on. He just said that Jalen's mom gets not cool, calm, and collected when he's watching. Is that the only time that she's not cool, calm, and collected?
She is out there. She is outgoing. You will hear her in the stands. That starts with our grandfather. He's passed away, but he was the loudest of. You could hear him. I mean, from my playing days, my brothers to his older brother, you could hear him. But no, you just kind of. The family's we're just real laid back, we never really let too much, get into us. Like, we don't get rattled up. Jalen just takes it to a whole nother level, he's just a one of a kind type of dude. He's not going to be in your face. Like if you mess up, putting your finger in his face, like all that, he's just going to lead. He's going to talk to you. He's going to lead by example. And if you watched, I don't know if you guys saw the interview with his high school coach from the USA days. But even his high school coach will just say he's just an even keel guy. He would like Jalen to kind of be more like raw, like don't mess up, don't do this. I need you to get up, but he just doesn't do it. And he stays calm, he stays cool and collected, and he delivers.
And I think given all of the changes that San Diego State went through when he took over, I think that demeanor is as perfect as anything, because if there was a time to panic, it would be there. And for him to be able to come in and have no panic, I think, like you said, leading that way was exactly what the Aztecs needed.
So, he's 5 games in. I think he's put up some of the top numbers quarterback-wise around the country. Definitely the conference, but mostly around the country as well. They're one onside kick recovery away from being 5-0 in those 5 starts. Yeah. What have you seen from him as a quarterback? Is it similar to what he did in high school? Where has he grown the most, you would think?
Yeah, that onside kick was definitely that hurt the family, us watching on that TV, because he played so good in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, just his growth is definitely, I know Jalen's he is a film junkie. So I know that he is, reading that playbook, getting it in, and watching film of the other guys. So just watching him do it, and I can say his growth is probably the way that he's reading now. From his quick game and going through the progressions. Because I say probably in high school he would probably go 1 or 2 progression, get out of the pocket, then still throw it. So now seeing him kind of working the pocket, sometimes a little longer than I would like him to, but that's probably his strong suit. Is just, man, he doesn't let that pressure in his face get to him. And, from the fans' point of view, we're like, run, move, get out of there. throw it. But he is surveying that field, and he wants to give his guys every chance to get open and throw it before he pulls it down and runs himself. So I think for me, that's where I see him growing. Instead of having the big 100 something yard rush yards, he's good with the 60 or, he may break one and get a 70, but passing for, 290 something, what was it, the 322 first game or something like that. That's where he wants to. So for me, that's where I see his growth, and just fitting those balls into tight windows, something he's always been good at.
Now, he and the coach announced last week that he's coming back for his super senior season next year. Any more trips on the horizon for you and the family to come back to San Diego?
I believe his mother will be coming down. What is it? Not the New Mexico game, but the was it Air Force?
Air Force. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I believe she will be down. Me, I would like to come down. I mean, me and my fiance got off the plane and we was like, "Oh, it's cold out here. We want to go back," because it felt great out there. So we will. I mean, now that he's coming back, we'll possibly get back out there. I coach, my club season runs, towards the end of that. So it's, we just have to look at, my schedule timing. But I mean, I would love to come back out there and see you play again, because we definitely had a good time out there.
Is there anything, Jalen's had a lot of interviews. We've heard a lot about him. Is there anything that we haven't asked you or he hasn't talked about that we should know about him, either as a player or a person?
I mean, not really. I think for the most part, I kind of, I'm on there a lot with my sports Twitter a lot, and I see what he's saying and all of that. So, I mean, everybody's pretty much asking him what everybody else is wanting to know. Of course, we all, the families all heard it and see it. Why wasn't he the starting, at the beginning, which is kind of what everybody's question was, and it's kind of the same with the family. It's just, we just kind of sit back and stay quiet and, let the chips fall how they fall, but it works out now. So, he's there and he's making the most of it. And now he's, letting everybody see, just how good he was and can be.
It was, I think, 2 weeks ago when he was at the press conference, I asked him about, how his family support and what it's meant to him. And he talked about how it's kind of kept him in the right headspace, going through these ups and downs, quarterback safety, back to quarterback. So, he's definitely appreciated that. And I think a lot of Aztec fans have really loved kind of the energy and the enthusiasm you guys have had, not just for Jalen, but for San Diego State. So I think that's definitely something everybody appreciates.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're definitely behind Jalen. 100%, 100%. We try to keep him cool and level-headed.
Last question. You're Coach Quise. So can you tell us what you coach and where and how that's gone about?
Oh, yeah. So I coach club volleyball, which is, we're with USA Volleyball, Dallas Premier Volleyball Club. I've been coaching volleyball, though, I've been with Premier for 5 years now. But I've been coaching club volleyball for, about 12 years. But I also have coached, select soccer. I was football. I mean, I'm a coaching machine. So trained, I started training athletes. And then it just, USA Volleyball just kind of was like, hey, you can make a lot of money doing this. So I ended up staying coaching club. But yep, I've coached the 15s, and I got the little babies, the 12s. Well, they're not little because they all taller than me. I don't know what the now, but they're big. So yeah, but yeah, I coach for Dallas Premier Volleyball Club, and I'm sure if we make it to nationals, we'll be. I think it's in LA this year. I believe nationals is. So that is the goal, making it to nationals.
Nice, definitely pulling for you, and good luck with that.
Appreciate it.
Marquise, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. It was really cool to connect with you. Unfortunately, we weren't able to connect in person, but hopefully when you do come back out, maybe next year for a game, we'll get to meet up in person.
Oh, sounds good. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good night, man.
All right. You too.
All right, Paul. So those are our two interviews for this 50th episode. Starting with Craig Smith. What were your main takeaways from that discussion?
I think we've all been wondering where conference realignment and using that as a recruiting tool, like where that was. And I just thought it was a great answer for him to say, listen, we keep everything factual, but yeah, we're talking about it. Our athletic director's talking about it. You can point to these articles and saying like, look, this is good. And this is something that's being talked about for San Diego State. And he said, we've had high level guys who weren't so interested in San Diego State. And that story breaks from Dan Patrick that, it's happening. And all of a sudden these people want to play. And so I think play at San Diego State. And so I think the idea that if they were in a Power 5 conference, it would just take recruiting to another level. I think you can already see that possibility with just that little hint. But I thought it was a great time to be able to talk with Craig. We're sitting here a month before signing day, and to be able just to kind of see, what they've been working on, what they've been thinking about, and the whole process. I thought was really, really great. What did you hear?
Yeah, just to touch on your point, I thought it was interesting how he said that higher rated recruits started calling them to see if it was really legit. Right. And then just that whole point about like class of 23 recruits, although they won't get into the Pac-12 or the Big 12 or wherever for next year, but some of those guys probably are going to redshirt. They're not really going to see the field until 2024. Those guys where they could potentially be in that Power 5 if you believe the rumors. But I think that's going to have the biggest impact on the class of 2024 guys.
Right.
Because that's when those are the guys who want to go into those Power 5 programs and do that. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then just the whole NIL and transfer portal thing. Brady Hoke on Tuesday was asked about all that stuff. And he mentioned about how NIL has played a big part of that. He mentioned how SMU gives $28,000 to each player. Now, it's not SMU directly, right? The schools aren't allowed to have direct
correct
relationship on the NIL deal, but everybody knows that the schools are facilitating these things, or at least people related to the schools in some capacity are behind this.
100%.
And so, but I also liked how Craig talked about the initiative that San Diego State has been help brokering with a former, I think, student athlete doing the NIL store. I've seen those pop up on Twitter and Instagram I think it came out about maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, where you can go to the website and you can buy a Caden McDonald t-shirt with his name and number on it, or a Max Garrison or whoever. All those guys that are part of that NIL collective. So I think it's really cool, but I don't think a lot of fans know about it. A lot of people that may not see that on Twitter or Instagram may not know that they can go buy that and support the players. So I think that's been a really cool thing that I've seen, and hopefully that can become bigger and better, as the years move on.
I agree. And I think that, the key with all of that is those collectives, which, like they had, he mentioned, Craig mentioned BYU, like the one you're talking about at SMU, these are not pay for play, right? So you don't go and say, for instance, hey, Jalen Mayden, you did really, really good this year, so you're going to get 10 times the amount that everybody else gets. It's everybody gets the same amount, and it's completely donor driven. So whether it's purchasing that, whether it's, just going and saying, listen, I just want to support this endeavor, and, here's X number of dollars to be able to make sure that these student athletes they work so hard and they can have a little bit extra to be able to just have, because obviously San Diego State, new stadium, all these things, the TV, all these people who are benefiting off of their name, image, and likeness, that they can also be able to do the same thing. And it is, it's goes hand in hand with moving to the next conference. Everyone understands that San Diego State is not going to be Texas A&M. That, they're not going to be giving out $1 million contracts like you see, at SC or something. But as long as something is in place, and I think it means a lot to these kids. And I think, Craig said that it comes up every time, like whether it's a direct question or indirect, it comes up every time. So I agree. I thought that was a really, really interesting point. And then the other takeaway for me, I didn't quite realize the pressure that he and the staff are under with Snapdragon Stadium. And how I mean that is, it's just like everybody knows that this should be a huge advantage, right? But 5 years from now, all the lessons of how they use Snapdragon Stadium will be known, and they can adjust, and they could say, this worked well, this didn't work well, we should do this, we should do this, we should do this. But right now, they're setting like the trend and the tradition of what that's going to be. And, you would assume that 5 years from now, it's going to be harder to get it wrong. But right now, they really do have the ability to, do you make it, like he said, the first thing that they see, and so they get really excited, or is it the closing piece? And how they, use Snapdragon and the newness and all that kind of stuff, it's huge and it's vital. But there's a lot of pressure to make sure that they get it done right. And I don't feel like I had paid attention to that aspect until we had that conversation with them.
Right. With early signing day coming up, they've got 11 players in the class that have committed verbally. Obviously school representatives are not allowed to talk about those players specifically before they sign. So we couldn't ask him, about those 11 guys specifically. But I'm just curious to see, how many of those 11 sign in December versus wait till February. How many new players commit and sign in December? Because, I think scholarship counts are probably starting to get a little low, especially if they're holding some for transfers. So, last year, everyone that had verbally committed signed except for 2. I think it was Hassan Mahasin and Josh Hunter who didn't sign until February, but they both signed. There was a lot of talk about why didn't they sign in December? Are they changing their mind or whatever? They didn't, but there's always that concern. So we'll see what happens. There's still a month to go. I think there's probably a few more positions that they're looking to fill, especially on the defensive front, that they're going to need to backfill. But I think those are probably going to be more transfers because they need guys to come in and play with experience. What about Coach Quise? What were your main takeaways from talking to him?
I mean, the apple didn't fall too far from the tree. I feel like I am more excited and blown away by the story of Jalen Mayden. And they're just like, no, this was going to happen. You know what I mean? It's just like, what do you mean? Like, so I thought that was pretty neat, man. I thought it was cool how he was just like, no, that, what, we've seen this in him and we've known that this is what he's going to do. And then for him to do it, definitely talked about how cool it was. But I liked, it's just, I enjoy family stuff. And so like, I've really enjoyed, him talking about like, okay, like you're switching to safety. Okay, let's do it. Go and text your brother and, get that and do that and do that. And we're going to support him and we're going to have another one. And then he says he saw him against Toledo and was like, okay, this guy can play. And then to be there full circle. And now he's back at quarterback and all of that, man. I really love that family support. And I thought that it was just great to hear, from his family, because every time that we've talked to Jalen, it's like, oh, my offensive line, my receivers, the defense did really, really good. The coaches have put me in a good spot, all this kind of stuff. And he's the guy setting the world on fire, and just to get a little bit of like Jalen centered talk about this is pretty amazing what this guy's doing. I thought was cool.
My biggest takeaway was that Tom Brady is Jalen Mayden's favorite quarterback. I would not have ever thought that.
Why? Isn't he everybody's favorite quarterback? That's a pretty
I don't know. A Texas kid who can run with the ball, and which Tom Brady cannot do. I would have thought there, and left-handed, I would have thought there had been some other quarquarterbers, but
okay, no, I see it.
Tom Brady is the GOAT.
Sure, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. It's like, yeah, exactly.
But a lot of people outside of the New England area, weren't big fans of Tom Brady.
That's true, but I think it's clearly a jealousy thing, which means you really, really love him, but he's not your quarterback. I may have guessed Cam Newton only because I love Cam Newton because of what he did for my nephew. But that viral video of him hitting that tackling dummy 40 yards down the field and Cam Newton give him that weird stink eye look. That's went everywhere. But yeah, no, I thought that was something, and I tried to hit on that question of why wasn't he further along? Why didn't he stand out? The thing that's always been true is that guy is a pocket passer. I mean, he has really good feel, really good feet, and he did the entire time. So I think Tom Brady fits pretty well. Not that I would have guessed it, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, I think going back to what you said, having that family support is awesome to hear. But they're confident in Jalen's abilities with whatever he does, whether he's a safety or a quarterback, because they know he's talented and they know he's smart. They know he works hard. Not that all of that stuff is guaranteed to have a success, but that definitely helps. And then, athletic and talent ability added into that. And so it's really cool. I like the fact that, he came to San Diego for a game and he was, met a lot of Aztec fans and definitely felt the love from everybody. Even after the interception, he said people were around him saying that we'll get this, we'll be fine. That's not typical Aztec fans, right? I would thought Aztec fans would be walking out the door down 14-0 at that point, right? Or trying to figure out who they could fire this time. So it was cool to hear that, and hopefully he'll be back next year for a game, and hopefully we'll get to meet him, because it definitely seems like a great family, great person.
Yeah, and I think that it's a great, I think maybe a segue in the Jalen Mayden story, where it's like he's the Aztecs quarterback now, right? The past is the past; it's done. And people asking me about it, like, "Oh man, he's looked pretty good." I'm like, "Yeah, for 5 games, it's not new. Like this is not like you're going like, okay, what's going to happen? What's going to happen?" I mean, he has almost half a season under his belt as a starter and has been really good every game. And so I think that it's a great segue to say, okay, it happened, whatever. This is where it's at. And he's the Aztecs quarterback. And, they've already obviously announced that he'll be there next year. And so it just really sets up, I think, a really great opportunity. And it begins here with New Mexico. And what on earth are they doing on 3rd down? That was the craziest thing I have ever been able to see from your preview, which is just dynamite as always. Take us through that.
So they have the 27th best 3rd down defense in the country, which is great. It's not astronomical or anything like that, but that's really good. But they have only given up 5 3rd down conversions that have been 3rd and 5 or longer.
Say that again.
They've only given up 3rd down conversions 5 times when the team had to go for 5 or longer yards to get the first
stupid.
down.
That doesn't make sense.
I had to. You know how many times I had to read that to make sure I wasn't not understanding it right before.
And how many past 7?
1 past 7.
So they've given up. They've given up 4 between 5 and 6 yards, and they've given 1 5 to 7, and then 1 over 7. That's crazy. Rocky Long is a wizard. That's something else.
Yeah, that's remarkable that they do that they can do. And I asked Coach Hoke how a team can do that, and he talked about how Coach Long gets them to play hard and play fast and go to the ball. But there's more of that. They've got a great secondary. They've got 2 of the best safeties in the conference. One's a true freshman who is tied for the lead in FBS by a freshman in tackles. So they've got good secondary, but still, 3rd and 5 is not that long, right? You could get a quick pass to a running back and get 5 yards, or a quick slant to a receiver over the middle. And yeah, that's remarkable stat. Probably the most astonishing stat I've seen all season.
I think you're right, and I think at one point the Aztecs were averaging 65 yards passing. So and I think this is more remarkable than that one.
Yeah.
Okay. So $50, right? When we talk to Coach Maddox at some point, hopefully over the the off season before next year, and we ask him, did you go back and watch New Mexico and study what they did on third down? Where would you take the bet?
If you say yes or no?
Correct.
I mean, you would say yes.
Okay, so yeah, me too. I'm just like I'm sitting there going, okay, well, I know somebody who's going to try to figure that answer out and what he did that was different, and what a resource, the different places that play the 3-5 to be able to go through and see how these creative minds are being able to attack it. But I think that stat is a concerning one for the Aztecs because they haven't been able to establish much on the ground. They've played rush defenses that come in statistically aren't very good, and they look really good. And so, I mean, if that holds, I thought that was one of Mayden's best traits is his ability to pick up those third and longs. And so I think that really is something to pay attention to because the Aztecs haven't been great on staying on schedule and setting up themselves in third and shorts. And then if that trend holds, then it's going to be where the Aztecs offense has been the best under Mayden, which is picking up third downs, and versus where the defense has been unbelievable. And so I think that's really interesting. And I think the other piece that I'd be really curious about, and again, I'd have to study it, I just wouldn't know, is New Mexico's offense has been really bad. Like if the offense from modern day high school switched with them, I don't know who would be, they always do that with the best college team be able to play in the NFL. Well, with the best offense in high school football, be able to, definitely would imagine that there are better offenses in the FCS and Division II, probably even than what they're saying. So I would wonder if a lot of those third downs that they're able to stop is because teams just aren't risking anything. They're just like, listen, we're going to punt and we're going to get the ball back with an extra 20 yards of field position or whatever. I think that this game is a huge trap game for the Aztecs. They finally kind of broke the fever of a terrible offense. They're at their highest point. Everyone's now thinking that they're good. No, you know what I mean? It's kind of like this new feeling for the Aztecs, and they're playing a team that needs to find a way to shortcut their rebuild. And the quickest way for them to shortcut their rebuild is to win on senior night, is to send their seniors off in a good way, and to beat Rocky Long's former team, to beat, Coach Gonzalez's former team. And so I think this if the Aztecs are not there Friday night, I think you look at the weird scores that have taken place on Friday nights in this conference. So there's a classic trap game that's there for the Aztecs, and they need to show up and be ready to play.
It's definitely got the makings of a classic trap game, but I just can't see how
that's the trap
game.
I agree.
Yeah, there's trap games where when you're looking at it and saying, well, this team is really good in this avenue and it's a really big weakness for us, and this team has played this well against these other teams. Other than that whole third down defense thing, like so much of New Mexico's everything else has been so poor.
Yeah.
They haven't thrown a touchdown pass since the second game of the season.
Yeah.
And I think in their last 53 drives, they have one touchdown scored, and they've given up two to the defense on turnovers. I mean, that's like the second most astonishing stat that I've seen. And it's came with both New Mexico, one positive, one really negative. But
no, last year when they played in Carson, they gave up like a strip touchdown, and that was it. And it felt like they could have had 100 more series against SDSU's defense, and they were not going to score. It didn't even look like it was competitive last year. So obviously, if that happens again, then there's no trap that can take place. But I'm just saying it has all of the because I can't see a way either. I can't see a way either. And as I said, I think that's the trap. But the Aztecs are coming in playing their best football.
Yep, as Paul said, it's a Friday night game, 6:45 p.m. on Fox Sports 1. Thanks, guys, for listening in. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this 50th episode and
50.
all prior 49 episodes as well. Thanks for all the good reviews and the subscriptions and the likes and the comments. We read them all and we appreciate them all. So thanks, guys. Have a good night, and we'll talk to you next week. You are listening to the SDSU Football Podcast, presented by the East Village Times, with your hosts Andre Hagverdian and Paul Garrison.